Ms. Emily's attendance roll call, the planned activities. But then, her gaze locked on Amy, a quiet 5-year-old, alone in a corner. Amy, usually a well-behaved and shy child, was now detached, an island in a sea of playful classmates. Ms. Emily dismissed it as a simple mood swing, but the unease lingered. During story time, Amy remained unmoved, her eyes distant. When Ms. Emily called her name, there was no response, just a slight tilt of the head that sent a shiver down the teacher's spine. Then, Amy spoke, her voice a fragile thread. "I hurt." She pointed to her stomach, and the silence that followed was heavier than any words. Against her better judgment, Ms. Emily continued the lesson, her mind racing. In her decade of teaching, she'd seen everything, but never a child say such a heartbreaking, cryptic statement. The next revelation was even more chilling. Dad said, "Don't tell anyone." A simple sentence, yet it felt like a crushing weight. A whirlwind of possibilities swirled in Ms. Emily's mind. Illness, fear, the unthinkable. The news had been filled with disturbing cases involving children, and she didn't want it to touch her classroom. Throughout the morning, Amy remained withdrawn, clutching a stuffed animal, refusing to participate. Her silence wasn't typical tiredness. It was a stifled tension. In the midst of the children's noise, one child's silence had become terrifying. During recess, Ms. Emily brought Amy to the teacher's lounge. There, she gently probed. Amy repeated her story, but this time, she added a detail. "Dad hurts me." The words hung in the air. Ms. Emily wouldn't ask any further questions, as she was afraid of what she might discover. The image of Amy's father, a smiling man who brought treats, who asked about his daughter's progress, flashed in her mind. There was nothing outwardly suspicious about him, but the fear in Amy's eyes was undeniable. That afternoon, Ms. Emily couldn't focus. After school, as the children were picked up, Amy remained, her eyes fixed on a corner. Ms. Emily knew she could no longer delay. She went to the principal's office, uttering only, "I think something is wrong with Amy." Principal Diane's eyes changed immediately. She listened intently, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. The words, "Dad hurts me," and "Dad said don't tell anyone," couldn't be ignored. They were a warning sign. Principal Diane and Ms. Emily agreed they needed more data. They decided to observe Amy for another day, documenting her behavior. Deep down, both knew they couldn't let this go. The next day, Ms. Emily returned to a noisy classroom. Amy was still isolated, refusing to engage. Ms. Emily meticulously recorded every gesture, every reaction. No violence, no yelling, just Amy's withdrawal. She recalled Amy's previous absences, her reluctance to participate, the times she cried without explanation. Amy's behavior was not that of an imaginative child, which was what made it even more unsettling. Amy was a child who cared, who listened. Her words weren't the ramblings of a child. Before dismissal, Ms. Emily observed Amy again. The stuffed animal was still clutched to her chest. Those eyes were of a child trying to escape. Amy was taken home by her grandmother. Ms. Emily noted Amy's continued unease. That night, she couldn't sleep, Amy's words and behavior replaying in her mind. She knew she needed help. The next morning, she returned to the principal's office with her notes. Principal Diane, without hesitation, called Ms. Carroll, a school psychologist. Ms. Carroll had years of experience with child abuse cases. Ms. Carroll observed Amy in class, then met with Principal Diane and Ms. Emily. She confirmed their fears. Amy showed signs of psychological trauma. The words, "Dad hurts me," could not be ignored. Ms. Carroll recommended 2 immediate steps: a medical examination and contacting Amy's mother, Mrs. Lauren, without informing the father, so as not to alert him. Ms. Emily's heart ached. This was no longer just a classroom matter. It was a family crisis. That afternoon, Principal Diane called Mrs. Lauren, who worked the night shift at a garment factory. Mrs. Lauren was unaware of the storm brewing. Ms. Emily gathered Amy's files. Every action was done in silence. At 1 p.m., the 3 women met in the principal's office, their eyes fixed on the closed door. Mrs. Lauren arrived, a look of bewilderment on her face. Principal Diane recounted Amy's recent behavior. Ms. Emily told her about Amy's words, "Dad hurts me." Mrs. Lauren's face paled. She didn't react immediately. Feelings battled within her. Ms. Carroll suggested Amy be taken to the children's hospital. Mrs. Lauren agreed. On the way to the hospital, Amy was silent. Ms. Emily recorded the trip in her mind. At the hospital, procedures were followed. Mrs. Lauren filled out forms, her hand trembling. Amy was taken for a private examination. Meanwhile, Ms. Carroll contacted the authorities. Mrs. Lauren waited outside the examination room. Ms. Emily kept looking at the clock. After a long time, the doctor emerged and needed more time. In another part of the city, John, Amy's father, was watching TV. He had no idea his phone was about to ring. John answered the phone, and Ms. Emily's voice came, urgent, asking him to come to the hospital. Amy was being examined. John's unease grew. He left his home. The hospital was lit up at midnight. John saw Ms. Emily and Ms. Carroll in the hallway, and 2 police officers. He was speechless. He turned to Ms. Emily, a question burning in his eyes. Ms. Carroll stepped forward, asking him to remain calm. Amy was being examined, but no accusations had been made. But John was not listening. He was in shock. He asked what was going on. Ms. Carroll repeated what had happened at school. John remained still, his eyes full of confusion. Then, he turned and walked towards the exit. The police reacted. One chased him, the other called for backup. Ms. Emily couldn't believe it. If he had done nothing wrong, why was he running? Inside the examination room, Dr. Williams spoke with Mrs. Lauren. Amy showed no signs of physical abuse, but had a severe, chronic urinary tract infection. The doctor mentioned the girl's words about her father. He said he had not run because he was afraid of harming his child. He confessed to his debts and his attempts to hide them. He said he did not intend to hurt Amy. He just did not know how to deal with his problems. At the hospital, Mrs. Lauren sat with her head in her hands. Ms. Emily and Ms. Carroll stood nearby. Amy had been given medication and was resting. Mrs. Lauren remembered Amy's words, her father's odd behavior, and the time she had been made a fool. Ms. Emily was also uneasy. She had suspected, imagined, and concluded based on instincts and fears. Ms. Carroll informed them that John was being brought back to the hospital. John appeared, and the women watched him. He walked towards Mrs. Lauren. A silence between them. Mrs. Lauren looked at him, her eyes tired, and spoke. "You can't scare her anymore." In the hospital room, Amy opened her eyes. She saw her father, and she held her toy. The next morning, Amy's health had improved. There was no evidence of violence, no sign of abuse. Amy's words, which could have been due to the pain, would be taken into consideration. However, John's actions remained suspicious. In the waiting room, John sat, looking pensive. He was allowed to stay in the hospital but couldn't contact his daughter without her mother's permission. He reflected on his life. In the hospital room, Amy was not scared. She looked at her father. The following day, Amy was discharged. She returned to Sunshine Daycare, where she gradually rejoined her friends. Ms. Emily watched from a corner, relieved to see Amy smile. She met Mrs. Lauren outside the school. They exchanged words, and the mother thanked the teacher for her actions. The school held an internal meeting. Principal Diane told a story, emphasizing the importance of observation. Ms. Carroll said that children do not always know how to express their pain. Ms. Emily recorded the ideas in her diary. After the meeting, the teachers discussed ways to improve their observation. Ms. Emily proposed keeping daily emotional journals for each student. At home, Mrs. Lauren and John began to talk. John revealed his debts and struggles. Mrs. Lauren listened. They decided to seek financial counseling and to communicate more. Amy sensed the change. She smiled more. Ms. Emily returned to school with a new journal. She wrote about the students in the class. She wrote to remember. One afternoon, the family went to the park. Amy played, laughing. Mrs. Lauren and John watched. They had come through hard times. Mrs. Lauren told John that she had missed so much. John said that he had changed, and that he would no longer hide anything from her. Amy was not scared. She was happy. At Sunshine Daycare, Ms. Emily continued her emotional journal. She knew a child would find a way to be heard. The story of Amy was kept a secret. It remained in the memories of those who were there. It was a reminder that in a noisy world, the most important thing was to listen to the small things. Thank you for listening to the whole story. Please share your thoughts and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to support the Sigma Stories team and receive interesting stories every day.